So it's been about a month since I've finished Far Cry 5, and I've had some time to mull things over and remove myself from my initial, more emotional reaction to the game's ending. A lot of reviewers and publications have already offered their opinion, or at least their retelling of the game's ending and how it made them feel, but what I don't think's been properly done is an analysis of just why this game's ending is so bad. Now please note this video is not intended to be an unbiased representation of Far Cry 5 or its ending. I'll concede right now that I despise the game's ending, but more important than my visceral reaction to it is how despite my best efforts to reconcile or empathize with the game's writing, I just couldn't understand how we got to this point. For those that haven't played the game, this is your one and only spoiler warning. If you do play the game, my genuine suggestion would be to play the game to its end, and once you reach the point of no return, simply shut the game off. You'll get a better experience that way, I promise. So let's set the stage for Far Cry 5. Unlike previous titles that were set in fictional areas that had influences from specific regions, Far Cry 5 is undoubtedly set in the United States. More specifically, it takes place in a town called Hope County. You get it? Well, the town's seen better days as a man by the name of Joseph Seed and his three siblings have begun wreaking havoc on the townsfolk, with Joseph standing in as the supposed messenger from God. The Eden's Gate cult has begun rounding up all non-believers and subjecting them to all manners of rape, torture, murder, and non-consensual drug use. Through the game, you'll face off against each sibling that's more depraved than the last until you finally face off against the Jim Jones himself, Joseph Seed. I don't want to get too bogged down in the minutiae of the rest of the story here, as this would become a really long video if I did, but it should be noted that each time you kill a sibling, you're treated to one of the laziest cutscenes I've seen in modern games. Joseph from the Black Void will begin waxing poetic to the camera, and I honestly don't understand how we as the character in the game are meant to have these monologues delivered to us. In past titles, you'd have Pagan Min reaching out to us via our radio or television, or you'd have Voss delivering his dialogue in person. But here, I don't really know. I guess he's just able to telepathically lecture us on deliverance. In the past, Far Cry's antagonists have had some kind of redeeming quality to them. In Far Cry 2, you had the Jackal that was a pragmatist that wanted to end a seemingly unending conflict. In Far Cry 4, you had Pagan Min, who, after the events of the game, seemed much more tragic and pathetic than we once thought. But in Far Cry 5, you have a man who, after witnessing the death of his pregnant wife, goes to his surviving child and kills her.
I took my fingers and I put them on that little plastic tube that was tape.
Now I understand that a protagonist is only as strong as the villain allows them to be, but in almost every circumstance, a villain will have some redeeming or at least relatable facet to them. Something that insidiously has the audience thinking in their head, wow, I kind of understand their perspective. So let's go back to Pagan Min and use him as our example. He's a despot in a failing country that has experienced civil war for decades. After having a loved one taken from him, he understandably goes off the deep end, and in the pursuit of peace attempts to stamp out any and all dissent. This is something that you as the player become all too familiar with as you reach the end of Far Cry 4. Meanwhile, in Far Cry 5, we have none of that nuance, and we're meant to somehow be able to moralize with a child-killing charlatan who has extended his suffering to everyone around him. I've racked my brain as to how I'm meant to rationalize Joseph Seed's actions, and I'm sure that someone in the comments will mention some piece of viral marketing or a random note that I missed in the game that would humanize him. But I would legitimately love to know how I'm meant to sympathize with the collection of people that force children to unknowingly eat their cooked parents. And while this is undoubtedly sickening, it's not even the event that cemented in my mind that Ubisoft was deliberately crafting a cartoonishly evil and irredeemable antagonist for you to fight against. During one of the game's prepper side missions, the game has you stumble upon a home that has a number of dead dogs outside. I'll preface this by saying that I recently became a dog owner, but even despite this personal bias, I could see that this content was designed to upset its audience. Inside the sealed building, you'll find that nearly half a dozen dogs have had to rummage through cupboards to survive, undoubtedly starving and living in their own feces. This is further emphasized by the body of a dog that's clearly attempted to escape, but was caught under a barricade to writhe in pain until he died. Now, to say that this made me upset was a bit of an understatement, and while this was clearly the game's intent, it needs to be in the service of something more, otherwise this just turns into misery porn. In place of something significant or substantial to say in its storytelling, Far Cry 5 instead opts to simply depress its audience, for no other purpose than a misguided notion that if your story is dark, it makes it good. Now, I might even find this acceptable purely in the context of Ubisoft developing a despicable character with no redeeming qualities that the player could feel some kind of lazy catharsis for killing. It wouldn't be compelling and it wouldn't be terribly interesting, but it would make sense. So what if I told you that instead Ubisoft has done the exact opposite and instead tries to posit that it's your fault for trying to stop this madness? Instead, it treats its audience to a bizarre pair of endings that seem to chastise the player for trying to intervene in what seems like unambiguously evil acts. This is going to be your last spoiler warning. If you care at all about playing Far Cry 5, please shut the video off now. Each of the game's two quote-unquote legitimate endings have the same result. You get to choose between option A, where all of your friends and the characters that you've met through your travels are now dead, or B, where all of the friends and characters that you've met along your travels are now dead. Wow, I haven't seen this level of divergent storytelling since I played the different color endings of Mass Effect 3. Now, in the interest of being fair, let's go over the endings in detail, and then I'll talk about the secret ending that's literally just the same recycled mechanic as Far Cry 4, which, in that context, actually made sense. Both of these two legitimate endings begin the same way. You go and confront Joseph at his church that we saw at the beginning of the game, and somehow your allies have all been captured and are now being held at gunpoint by brainwashed NPCs. It's notable here that the in-game drug known as Bliss can now apparently do this, whereas before it just seemed to turn people into mindless zombies. From here, Joseph Seed and ostensibly the writer have the balls to blame you for the death and depravity that's occurred in Hope County for the events of the game. Evidently, our unwillingness to allow Eden's Gate to go around raping, murdering, and torturing innocent civilians makes us somehow responsible for all the bad in the world. The first option allows you to walk away. As you leave Joseph in peace, you also abandon all of your allies that you built relationships with throughout the game to an apparent zombification thanks to the effects of Bliss. We get into our truck and the marshal tells us we're going to Missoula to call in the National Guard. Just then, a familiar song plays on the radio, a song that had previously led us to kill one of our allies doing a brainwashing that we had received at the hands of Jacob Seed. In writing this, the game seems really eager to use this whole brainwashing trope, despite being incredibly inconsistent with its usage. What we're meant to assume here is that we've somehow been activated by this song, and we're likely to kill everyone in the vehicle. If you picked this ending initially, you could be forgiven for thinking that the game was somehow punishing you for your cowardice, your inability to see the game through to its end. Keep that in mind until a little bit later. The second option has you fighting through your previous allies, and apparently now your gun fires a healing spray like you're the medic from Team Fortress 2. I'm not joking, you need to shoot your allies until they're each pacified, and only then are they able to no longer be brainwashed. After this, the Bliss drug serves yet another plot purpose by acting like some kind of ninja smoke bomb for Joseph Seed. Inevitably, you'll incapacitate him, and just as the in media res begins, a nuclear explosion will go off in the foreground. After racing around a hellish landscape, you'll hit a tree, all of your allies die, and you awaken inside of the first NPC of the game's bunker to find him dead and Joseph Seed standing over us. As I said before, your option is to either have all of your friends killed or to have all of your friends killed. The only real option here is whether or not you want them to die by your own hand or by the nuclear hellfire that will now coat the earth. In truth, the former isn't really any different, because even if you don't kill your allies, the logic of the game is that we're only seconds away from becoming the next game in the Fallout franchise. Now, these two endings may seem really terrible, but I think the worst by far is the secret ending. Unlike its inclusion in Far Cry 4, which actually made sense in the context of the game and legitimately surprised players, Far Cry 5 tries to awkwardly attempt the same trick. While in Far Cry 4 this was woven into the story, as you later find out by playing through the game, in Far Cry 5 you take a helicopter ride all the way to Joseph's compound and simply choose not to arrest him. I've seen some people dub this the good ending, but let me remind you that before you even landed, the cult had begun feeding children their parents. The game actually seems to suggest that apathy is the best course of action when it comes to dealing with a militant cult. And just like the previous endings, we can still assume that we're still only days away from a nuclear holocaust. Do you see how a twist ending can infect every other part of your game's storytelling? To be absolutely clear, the writers have predetermined that all of the work you perform in the game, every outpost you clear, every silo you destroy, every side mission or person you save is suddenly made pointless by these endings. At best, you've bought that hostage on the side of the road a few days before they're turned into Sarah Connor from her dream sequence in Terminator 2. And for the life of me, I can't understand what I'm meant to derive from these endings apart from a big fuck you for trying to save people from a really transparently evil threat. It's a bizarrely mean-spirited jab in the player's eye. Evidently, in Far Cry 5's mind, if we saw Jim Jones handing out the punch to his congregation, we should just go and mind our own business and let them be. It's quite literally trying to promote being tolerant of the intolerant. These endings are so cynical, so devoid of soul, and so out of place that I wonder if they simply ran out of time and instead opted for an out-of-left-field twist to supplant an actual ending. It only serves to punish players that stuck out the game through to its end. Now, a lot of comments I've seen on articles critical of this ending dismiss this as gamers simply wanting a quote-unquote good ending. And while I think that many players would reasonably want an ending where a child-killing psychopath actually lost, gamers have enjoyed better games in the past like Spec Ops: The Line or The Last of Us that had actually earned their downbeat endings through their impressive storytelling and narratives. Far Cry 5 instead opts to do the equivalent of trying to cut in line at the last second and say, see, I can have a nihilistic ending too, and it's so unearned and it reeks of a desperate need to be seen as artistic or deep or controversial. And this just doesn't work when your game has spent the last 10 plus hours celebrating violence and Americana, featuring achievements based on how many ways you can kill a cultist, only for its ending to throw it back in your face as if you're some kind of monster for enjoying a game that was handcrafted to make it fun to shoot and kill other human beings. Now, some people might say that I'm getting way too worked up over the last 20 minutes of a game that spans over 10 hours for most playthroughs. But the cherry on top of Far Cry 5's ending is that it's not just terrible in isolation, it colors every subsequent playthrough. This is best illustrated when you complete the main objective of the game, where upon reaching the title screen you're now treated to a new image of Hope County, one that's in ashes. And this just really sucks. One of my favorite parts of playing Far Cry is after the main events of the game's narrative are over, I can just go back and complete all the side missions. I can assist the locals in rebuilding their home. All of this is aided with the context that I'm still doing some good in the world. In Far Cry 5, if you buy into the game's own narrative, going back and finishing the annual Testicle Festival seems a little difficult to care about when you know everyone will be vaporized in a few days. And this perfectly catalyzes why, unlike other titles in the series, you can't just simply go back playing after experiencing this ending. No matter how much you'd like to just go and continue and enjoy the parts of Far Cry 5 that you actually liked, it's been taken away from you by a writer that was more concerned about having a controversial ending than one that didn't strip away the player's agency or ability to enjoy the game world. I've played over 100 hours of this franchise, and for the first time I now have no desire to replay or return. What's worse is that it's pretty clear that Ubisoft was aware of this likelihood as well, as all of the projected DLC has no ties to the main story of the game. In this, we're actually meant to assume the permanence of this ending, and I'm not really sure if this is a good or bad thing at this point. There may come a time when people come back to defend this ending in a few years, or even a few months. But I want to end this video by making a clear distinction between doing something artistically courageous and brave, and something cynical for marketing.
Barely said a word.
Yeah, Daria, tell your dad what edgy is.
As far as I can make out, edgy occurs when middle-brow, middle-aged profiteers are looking to suck the energy, not to mention spending money, out of the quote-unquote youth culture. So they come up with this fake concept of seeming to be dangerous when every move they make is the result of market research and a corporate master plan.
If you've made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks for watching the video. My true desire with any game that comes out that I don't like is that I'm in the minority. I really get no joy from other people being disappointed, and if you're one of those people that liked Far Cry 5 and its ending, I actually want to hear from you. This video is a lot shorter than what I had planned for Far Cry 3, since I wanted to do a bit of a retrospective on that game with Far Cry Classic being announced. If you enjoyed this video, I'll be doing more long-form analysis on games that I actually enjoy. Most likely BioShock will be next. Last but not least, I wanted to put out an open invitation for any feedback. If you have an idea for how I could make these videos better, or if you just hate my voice, I want to know. And with that, I'm gonna go walk my dog. Yeety.